Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. We are finishing another week in the Word. It's been good. We are so close to finishing the book of Genesis. We'll finish it up next week. But today we're in chapter 46, all of chapter 46. I know a big chunk of that was reading names, and I know how some of you feel about that. I kind of feel the same way, but honestly, there was a whole lot in chapter 46 for me to kind of dig into. So let's talk about some of that. First off, if you're most of us, all of us are reading from English translation, so we don't really know the details of the Hebrew text. Remember, originally the Old Testament, most of it is written in the Hebrew language, including the book of Genesis. So what you miss is the way in which the text goes back and forth between the name Israel and the name Jacob for the same person. Remember, after he wrestled the angel, his name was changed to Israel, and that becomes the name of the nation. So here it says Israel set out for Egypt in the very first verse. Israel set out for Egypt. So again, it's this real important way in which the man represents the nation. And so the nation Israel, the man Israel, Jacob. He is at Beersheba, which remember is the primary establishment, the home of his father, Isaac. It was his principal place of residence. It's Beersheba from which Jacob left, from the very beginning. After he left Beersheba, he had that vision of the stairway, the ladder that reached to heaven. So in so many ways, Beersheba is home for Jacob. It is definitely a place of spiritual significance. And so it's at that place there at Beersheba where he stops and worships to God. And during that night, God speaks to him. Going to Egypt is a very important, but also in some ways, he's very hesitant to take his family to Egypt. Remember, Abraham had a bad experience there when Pharaoh ran him out. And then, of course, Isaac is forbidden to go to Egypt. And so Jacob must know of these things. He has inherited this aversion to Egypt, and of course the promise, everything is related to the land of Canaan, and so it really does require this reassurance from God that he can go, that he should go. And so God appears to him and says, "Don't be afraid to go. I want you to go." Now remember, Beersheba is also that place where God said early on, I'm going to be with you on this journey, and I will bring you back. I will bring you back. And so here, God sort of reaffirms that same promise. I want you to go to Egypt. Don't be afraid to go to Egypt. Take your family to Egypt. I will bring you back again. So God has already demonstrated in Jacob's life his faithfulness to keep those promises, and his willingness to accompany you and then to make sure that you come back. And so this is the reassurance that Jacob receives in this vision. He lets him know, you're going to die in Egypt, but Joseph is going to be there at your dying bed and will be the one to close your eyes. Again, at this point, Jacob hasn't laid eyes on Joseph yet, but God promises him it'll be Joseph beside you in the moment you die. A beautiful reassurance. And again, that's God is just so good. He always gives us exactly what we need in the moment that we need it. From there, we really do get this long list of Jacob's descendants. These are the ones that go into Egypt. This matters, of course, because it's in Egypt where God is going to make of him a great nation in ways that are beautiful and in ways that are full of suffering and sorrow. And then the genealogy comes, all of the names. By now, I think because we've read Genesis, you can just sort of read this and it's all of these names have stories behind them, and you know those stories. Now, what comes out at the end, though, is this really interesting math problem. And it doesn't take a genius or a scholar or anything to get to the end of this, where it says, now, the number of those who went with him down to Egypt, not counting his sons' wives, was 66. All right, 66. And then it says, and then also Joseph and his two sons, they were already in Egypt. And so altogether there were 70. Again, y'all know me. I don't do math in my head well, but I know that 66, plus Joseph and two sons, that doesn't equal 70. And so, I mean, forever and all time, people have tried to figure out who's who's the last person? 66 plus Joseph and 2 sons. That is 69. That is not 70. So who's the last person? How do we get to 70? But incidentally, we've read Exodus together. Remember how Exodus chapter 1, verses 1 to 4 comes right back to this passage and said, there was 70. Yeah, well, were there 70? Because I can't make this equal 70. Guys, the rabbis through the years have tried to make this equal 72. I think they're a little ambitious. The rabbis have often said, well, the 70th person was the Lord because he said he'd go with them. Well, I think that's stretching it just a little bit. I don't know about that. And I'll tell y'all, my answer to this is I think the 70th person was probably Jacob. I don't think Jacob is counted in the descendants of Jacob who leave with him. I think Jacob isn't counted in the 66, but then when you count everybody who was in Egypt in Jacob's family, then you add Joseph, his sons, and I think you add Jacob. So I say it's Jacob, and that's how you get to 70. Anyway, that's me. And again, y'all know not to trust me in math, but that's how I get to 70. Makes sense to me. Just let me know in the comments what you think. I just would count Jacob and I would move on. From there, Jacob sends Judah to sort of coordinate the reunion. Jacob and Joseph are about to be reunited. And I think it's just amazing, a sort of poetic justice that it's Judah who coordinates their reunion. Because remember, way back, it was Judah who said, hey, let's don't kill him, let's sell him. And so it's Judah who coordinates, orchestrates the reunion of Jacob and Joseph. When Joseph arrived, he embraced his father and he weeps, holding him for a long time. The interesting there for me, verse 30 there, this is a moment when you would expect a lot of emotion and passion from Jacob, because we've had, multiple stories of Jacob. And I mean, this is a passionate man. Remember the first time he laid eyes on his beautiful bride, Rachel, he had just moved that giant rock off the well. He lays eyes on her and it says, he hugs her and he cries out loud. I mean, he don't even know this girl, and he's, all over her and crying, and then, he sees Esau again and he cries, and he's, seeing you is like seeing the face of God. And I mean, this dude, he cries at the drop of a hat. And he's all over people when he hadn't seen them, just hugging them. And his restraint here actually, and the kind of striking lack of passion. I mean, his words are important and I suppose emotional, but you just sort of get the idea that at this point, Jacob, he's been grieving Joseph for 20 years. And at this point, he's got no tears left to cry. You just get that sense that he is all cried out. But notice what he says. I've seen your face again. I'm seeing your face again. That's typical Jacob. Remember, he talks about seeing the face of God at Peniel. And then he talks about, when he sees Esau, it's like seeing the face of God, seeing your face. And so here, when he says to Joseph, he uses that language to see your face, it puts this moment, this reunion on the par with those two other high points of his life. When he sees the face of God or wrestles the angel, when he sees Esau reunited with Esau, and now when he is reunited with his son, Joseph. Okay, I'm out of time, but let me jump to the end. Joseph gives instructions to his brothers about, listen, you're about to meet Pharaoh, so don't embarrass me. My redneck family's about to meet my boss. And so notice what he says there, make sure you tell him, that we're shepherds. That way he'll put us all out in Goshen. It's important to Joseph somehow that his family, sort of wins that land there at Goshen, and they will. But Joseph's trying to, tell them what to say so that they end up in Goshen. And part of what he says here is, tell them you're shepherds, which they are, that's the truth. But tell them you're shepherds, then he'll put you out in Goshen, because Egyptians hate shepherds. Okay, this is the second time that we've been told, for whatever reason, that there's something between the Egyptians and the Hebrews, or in this case, Egyptians and shepherds. And let me just say, scholars don't know what exactly to do with that. Back, earlier when his brothers were at Joseph's table, and it said they put their brothers at a separate table because the Egyptians don't like to eat with Hebrews. We don't know what that was about. There really weren't any. There wasn't any kind of actual racism between Egyptians and the Jewish people, not at first. But most scholars think it has to do with just the basic real difference between the people, and especially this idea that they're shepherds, that they tend to animals. The Egyptians, from what we know of their history, they dressed in linen, almost exclusively linen clothing, and they were very obsessed with hygiene. And anybody who keeps animals, especially the Hebrews here, the Jewish people, they tend to sheep, which means they often dress in wool clothes. And the Egyptians didn't like wool clothing. They thought that it smelled, and it did. Wool clothing tends to retain the oil of the animals and plus the sweat of the worker. And so it's possible they didn't want to eat with them because they stink. Their clothes, the wool clothes stink to them. And then here, it just goes back to, they don't like shepherds. The Egyptians were city dwellers. The animals were often kept out in pasture land, like at Goshen. Pharaoh probably has his animals out in Goshen, which is why he says later, hey, if any of your brothers are pretty good with animals, let them take care of mine too. So the Egyptians don't like animal husbandry. And again, probably because of that contact with animals, the lack of hygiene, the smell of the wool. There are lots of reasons why it seems like, tell them you're shepherds and they're guaranteed to put you out at Goshen, which is where Joseph wants his family to be. We'll pick up right here on Monday morning, right there at chapter 47 verses 1 to 31. Jacob is going to meet Pharaoh, and the family begins to settle in Egypt. So here we go. Listen, I've enjoyed this week. Have a good weekend. Pray for our teenagers this weekend in an event called D Now, Disciple Now Weekend. We have a bunch of kids here all weekend long. We're just praying it'll be a great spiritual moment for them. Pray that God will soften their hearts for Him. Sunday morning in the pulpit, I'll be preaching about the cost of discipleship. If you don't have a church home, join us at 8, 9:30, or 11 here in person at Woodburn or online. Listen, I appreciate your love of the Word and your friendship and partnership in reading it together. So, Lord willing, I'll see you at 10 o'clock Monday morning.